According to research, the top 5 productivity challenges for business leaders include managing growth and growing the business predictably, issues relating to hiring, employee engagement, accountability, leadership, and performance management, which are usually major concerns for CEOs, maintaining profitability and healthy cash flow, successfully executing new strategies, projects, and plans, as well as leading change initiatives across the company. And finally, aligning business units and people toward a common vision and keeping the team on the same page as well. Could there be an app that actually solves the issue of enhancing productivity through a path of least resistance? Our guest claims to have created it, and we'll be exploring that in just a bit. Hello, and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast, brought to you by Sproutworth.com. I'm Vinay Koshy, and our guest is Jeremy Nagel. Jeremy, describe yourself as a neurodivergent indie hacker who recently sold your startup Smooth Messenger. And during that journey of selling Smooth Messenger, I believe you were diagnosed with ADHD, which is basically inattentive and hyperactive, as well as ASD level 1, which refers to autism or part of the autism spectrum. But the diagnosis, I believe, helped you understand your differences and allowed you to spend more time playing to your strengths as opposed to trying to fix parts of yourself that weren't actually broken, but just different. Your new project, as a result of this journey, is Focus Spare, which I'd love to dive into. But I'm curious, what started this journey of actually trying to get a diagnosis and dealing with that diagnosis?
It probably started when I was in my teens and just had this sense of not being the same as other people in high school and really feeling a bit inadequate, not being able to do the same things or socialize in the same way as my peers, and feeling quite a lot of anxiety and self-reprobation around it. And it was my mid-20s, after having had quite a bad start to my career where I was fired from a couple of jobs due to those issues. I sought a pre-diagnosis at that point because I had a cousin who was diagnosed with autism, and
Right.
I felt that I wasn't that dissimilar to him. I ended up getting a pre-diagnosis when I was 24. I didn't follow through with it because there's quite a high cost to doing it, that as an adult, you have to fork out a couple of $1,000s in order to get an assessment. Much easier if you get assessed when you're a kid. And I think these days, most people who were in my situation would have been picked up when they were younger. But I figured things out the hard way, the school of hard knocks, and discovered my own coping strategies, figured out how to actually work in a way that wasn't going to put people offside, and found a niche as a software developer. And then in the last couple of years, I was doing my own apps that I was building, as well as having a day job. And that was Smooth Messenger, which was a side project originally related to helping businesses send SMS out of Zoho CRM. I'd been working in Zoho CRM for 10 years before that, and ended up building something that people wanted, and that business got acquired eventually. And I think that the actual concept of side projects and side hustles is an element of playing to my strengths there, in that as an ADHD, I have a lot of different interests, and it's hard for me to focus on one thing. And there's a conventional wisdom around the need to focus and just do one thing. I think that can be true, but for me, I often have a couple of plates that I'm spinning at the same time. In terms of the actual diagnosis of ADHD, that surprised me, to be honest. I hadn't really seen the signs in myself, even though I was someone who, for most of my 20s, had at least 2 jobs and a business going. That was how my hyperactivity expressed itself, in trying to do a lot of things at the same time, and also getting distracted quite easily. But I was a big productivity nut, so I'd read David Allen and all these productivity gurus, and I had it managed by elaborate to-do lists and checklists and things like that. But when I went for my formal autism diagnosis, because I had the money after the business got acquired, the psychologist said, I think you have signs of ADHD as well. And he put me through that assessment too. And that was when I realized that I was both autistic and ADHD, which is actually quite common, that it's common for people who are autistic to end up with ADHD as well.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. So, given the diagnosis and your interest in productivity, why create Focus Bear?
I created it for myself originally because even though I had these elaborate strategies, they were working decently, but I was also getting to a point where I was in danger of burning out because I had a day job, I had Smooth Messenger, which had grown to 500 customers across the Americas, Australia, and Europe. And that's very hard to manage when I'm in
Mhm.
Australia. America and Europe would be fine if you're in the US, but for me, I basically was getting up at 5 a.m. in order to do customer support with the US customers. And I had another person helping me. I'd hired someone in El Salvador and he was covering most of it, but I still had to handle the level 2 escalations. So I'd wake up and I'd go straight to my computer and deal with stressful situations where things weren't working well for customers. And then I had my day job during Australian hours. And then in the evening, I had the European customers. In the meantime, I'm trying to also negotiate with the acquirer and talk to accountants and tax people. And it was all getting very stressful. I could see that it was actually becoming a self perpetuating cycle of getting up early, having not slept enough, and then because I was tired, I wouldn't go for my run in the morning, which actually really helped with my productivity and my mental health. But by not doing it, I was more anxious and I was also less productive. And so
Mhm.
I end up working later and later. And I was getting to the point where I wasn't sleeping very much. I wasn't spending very much time with my wife. And I felt that I needed a circuit breaker. And I knew that if I could just give myself even 15 minutes to go for a run and do a little bit of meditation, I'd have a better day. It wasn't as much as I ultimately wanted to do, but that would be a start. So that was the original idea of Focus Bear, to lock my computer until I had done my meditation and exercise. So I had used other habit tracking apps, but that wasn't enough for me because I would just ignore it. I'd wake up and I'd think, there's so many emails that I know are waiting for me. I can't afford to go and meditate for 5 minutes, even though the days that I did it, it helped. So by setting it up where basically my whole screen was covered with a dialog box saying, do your meditation, do your exercise, and it had a countdown timer. So 5 minutes of exercise where I'd either do a HIIT workout or go for a run. And then I'd hit next, and then it would say meditate for 5 minutes. And then after I'd done that, then my email is unlocked. And that works surprisingly well for me, that
Right.
small amount of just having some time to prepare myself for the day, it made me so much calmer and made the conversations with the acquirer much easier and helped me to be able to actually get stuff done. And then over time, I've added in a bit more to the routine where now I spend more like an hour and a half each morning doing half an hour of meditation, and I go for a run and do some journaling and things like that. But it was something where I had to start very small and gradually add little bits of time. Right, started
Mm.
with 5 minutes the first week, and then made it 6 minutes the second week, and from then on, got was able to carve out more time and be more productive. So that was the original idea. And then we've added a lot of other features in there as well that I can talk about too in terms of enhancing productivity.
Sure, brilliant. I'm also curious, given your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
It's definitely creativity. I can show you all these bits of paper, which are ideas that come to me all the time. Where when
Mhm.
I'm eating lunch or I'm out for a run, I often have ideas about how to do something different marketing wise or a feature to add in. And capturing those ideas and executing them is definitely my strength. That I think I can tell you an anecdote that would indicate that I have more ideas than other people, which is that my first professional job, they had this idea called the suggestion box, where you could put in ideas about how to make the business processes better. And when I started, in total, they had 5 ideas in the box. And after a few months after I started, they had to shut it down because I had submitted more than 50 ideas and they were just overwhelmed and couldn't process them. So that's definitely my greatest strength.
Certainly. And in that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
I think the neurodiversity angle is probably something that many business owners aren't aware of, in terms
Mhm.
of the tendency when we hire to hire clones of ourselves, that we look for people that seem to interact in the same way that we do, think the same way we do, act the same way we do. And there can be some benefit to having a few people like that. But it's best if we think about it from the neurodiversity paradigm to have some people who can think slightly differently, because there's evidence around if you only have clones of yourself, then you're only going to be able to sell to clones of yourself, and you're only going to be able to make products that appeal to clones of yourself. And
Mhm.
we don't represent the entire spectrum of humanity. And so it's much better if we can start to involve people in the business who have many different aspects of diversity. And we're all aware of the importance of gender diversity and also cultural diversity. Now, neurodiversity is becoming a paradigm that we should be thinking about, making sure that we've got people who can add those extra ideas and also set up businesses in a way that's going to cater to them, just as we wouldn't have meetings at 7 a.m. because it might compromise people who have families. Also, we need to be thinking about how do we structure the office so that it's going to work for people like me, where I'm very sensitive to background noise. So if you put
Mm.
me in an open plan office environment where people refuse to go to meeting rooms and they just have loud conversations behind me, I can't be very productive. But if I'm allowed to retreat to activity-based working areas where there's a quiet zone where you can go if you want to work, or you can work from home, then I can get a lot done in a short amount of time.
Mm. Brilliant. How would you say that being neurodivergent has shaped your leadership style and company culture at Focus Bear?
It's shaped it both for good and for bad. In terms of for good, I think it makes me a bit more conscious about people's differences, that I value difference. I try to live that idea that I just shared, where with Focus Bear, for example, I've been very intentional about hiring people who are not exactly like me, but have
Mhm.
aspects that I don't have. So I've hired people who have lived experience of ADHD because I think it's important that they can empathize. But I've also hired people who they are neurotypical, but they have a family member who has ADHD. So they really understand the struggles, but they also have a little bit more organizational basic skills than I do. I have to really work at it, and other people have it by default. Where it can be challenging for me is that often with ADHD and autism, there's this phenomenon called rejection sensitive dysphoria, where I can get quite down if I have a feeling that people don't like my ideas. And that can be challenging both in terms of the type of work that I have to do as a leader, where I'm the one who does investor pitches, I'm the one who gets on sales
Mm.
calls, and that just inherently has rejection associated with it. So that can really get me down. And also, just in terms of the way that I deal with people who disagree with me, that I have to really work at noticing the reaction that comes up for me if someone has a different idea and they don't seem to be consulting me or incorporating my ideas. I can have a tendency to overreact. And that's been a personal journey for me to really lean into mindfulness practices and to deal with that aspect of leadership, of having greater emotional intelligence, because it doesn't necessarily come naturally to me. But over time, I think it will become a strength for me as I continue to refine that muscle.
Mhm. And I'm curious, when you first started the Focus Bear, it was really for yourself. But once you decided to launch it, how did you define success?
Revenue is an obvious thing
Right.
to look at, but I, I really like the triple bottom line approach to running a business, where I'm thinking not just about the dollars coming in, which is absolutely important for financial sustainability, but also about the impact that we're creating. So I very early on added a self-reporting scale into the app where people answer a question, how productive did you feel? And that gets asked at the end of the day. And we also prompt them for feedback in other ways, asking, is this making a positive impact to your lives? I try and talk to as many users as I can, because that is important, that I want it to be making a difference. And through those conversations, I've seen that some of the ways that I had structured the app that suited me did not suit other people. For example,
Mhm.
I like to be made intentional. So when I start work in the morning, the app will ask me, what do you want to achieve for the next half an hour? And I really value that. Other
Mhm.
people sometimes find that it gets in the way, and we've had to tweak it so that it's a little bit less annoying. I feel that it's a positive nudge. A lot of people like it. Some people on certain days don't like it. So we've had to make it more flexible so that it's catering to how they're feeling at that point in their day.
Yeah. So has that changed to date, the focus of how you define focus spare?
In terms of the overall problem we're trying to solve, I don't think it has changed.
But as a success as well.
I'd say that because I'm working with a lot of mentors and I'm doing some startup programs, I'm being given different metrics to track. And I
Okay.
think the metrics that are important also change over time. That in the
Mhm.
beginning stages, it was really about the desirability metrics in terms of would people actually go and search for something like this? And when I was doing customer interviews, where the goal is to talk to 100 people and ask them, without selling your idea at all, what problems do you experience, and
Mhm.
figure out based on that, is there a market for what I'm intending to create? So in those early stages, it was really the desirability metrics of, do they want it? And then as the business grows, it's more about, will they pay for it? Will they keep using it? So in that sense, the metrics or how I define success is changing as the business matures.
Certainly. Okay. Now, you've incorporated a lot of science behind the approach that you use with Focus Spare. Could you talk us through it, explain what exactly you're doing to ensure that people find success in using the platform?
Mm. Yeah, so the idea that going for a run in the morning would lead to a more productive day might seem like a non-obvious tangent, but there's actually a fair bit of research supporting the idea that aerobic exercise and mindfulness practices have quite a profound impact on ADHD. The default treatment for ADHD is to prescribe stimulant drugs, or there are also some non-stimulant drugs, but typically that's the first line of treatment, that you go see a psychiatrist, you get a diagnosis, and they give you some pills. And I have nothing against that approach. I have been prescribed stimulant medication myself, and I do find it helpful at certain times. But I think what works best for me personally is a combination approach where most days I don't need the medication. I'm I do very well just by having those more behavioral change strategies, which are research backed. There's plenty of research, like I said, that not only for people with ADHD, but for people in general, if we do aerobic exercise in the morning, it has so many benefits on not just our physical health, but also on our ability to concentrate later through the day, and also on our mental health, on our ability to remain calm through stresses that might come up in the day. So that's one of the areas where there's research behind it. The second area is around some of the specific productivity strategies. And one thing that I had found in the past was that I very easily get distracted. And once I get distracted, it's hard for me to come back to what I was doing before. A common problem for me was I'd have this thought of, I wonder what's happening in the news right now. And in the current day and age where there's so much global conflict and so many things going on, I think that desire to check the news can be, yeah, difficult to avoid. But there's research showing that if you go and click on that link or read that email, look at the inbox, go on social media, you basically, the cost of context switching is 20 minutes to get back to what you were doing before. And for me, sometimes I would never get back to it. So the way we design Focus Bear is that we try and detect when attention is drifting away. So we use AI to check whether the website or the app that someone has just opened is relevant for what they were intending to do. So I'll say, for example, for the next 25 minutes, I'm going to be investigating a bug. And then if I go to a news website, the AI will say, no, that's not relevant. Or if I go to, I'm writing code in JavaScript, if I go and look up Hacker News and read a page about Rust, documentation for Rust, which is another programming language, it's not Facebook, it's not news, but it is equally as distracting because it's not relevant to what I'm doing at that point. And the AI is pretty good at picking that up. So evidence-based in the sense that there's research about the cost of context switching and also evidence around what works in terms of distraction management, that it's important to find a balance where it can't be too strict because then people just abandon it, but it also can't be too gentle because then people just skip it. So we've sought to find a nice balance there where it intervenes by blurring out your screen. You can still block it, or you can still override it and access it if you really need to, but it just provides that mental speed bump to go from the system to thinking really fast and hyperactively or impulsively to slowing down and thinking rationally, do I really need to use this? Is it necessary?
As you look to incorporate these science-based principles, do you have someone on your team or people on your team who actually provide this level of input, this science-based and perhaps a psychological input into how the platform develops, or is this just based on research that you do and try and incorporate into the platform?
Yeah, when we started, I worked with a neuropsychologist, Marta Galan, who
Right.
specializes in ADHD, and she provided a lot of the initial guidance. These days, we're looking to partner with a research organization. So I'm talking to some researchers at Monash University, for example, because I'd like to actually do a validation study to look at if we give 50 people access to the app in monitoring mode and 50 people in intervention mode, see whether we can actually track changes in their productivity over time as they use the app. So that's hopefully a 2025 project to do that side-by-side study. But it's something that I have a strong personal interest in, and I had a small research background in the past. And I'm trying to hire people who also share that interest in evidence-based interventions.
Okay. Could you share a particular challenge you face while developing Focus Bear and incorporating the elements that you found to get traction and more users onto the platform?
Yeah, sure. I think a challenge with B2C products is the high quality bar needed in order to actually appeal to people. So I think with B2B, it's somewhat easier in that there's greater tolerance for rough edges. I've found that definitely with Smooth Messenger, that even though I've spent a lot of time on the UX and it was a lot better than the competition, it was still very slow. Like even today, it sometimes takes 20 seconds to load a page in Smooth Messenger. And people just put up with it because it's solving a business problem and there aren't really any alternatives. But with Focus Bear, we're in a crowded market. There's a lot of apps that do distraction blocking and a lot of apps that are in the habit tracking space. So it has to be that idea of it has to be 10 times better than the competition. And that's hard to execute when you're bootstrapping and when also I'm still working on Smooth Messenger post acquisition. I've been engaged as an employee since then as part of the sale contract. And so I've got limited time to figure it out. So that's been the challenge of trying to work out what do we actually need to tweak in order to make it super appealing for people and to make it 10 times better. And I think what I've found over time is that customer interviews seem to be the secret ingredient there. And it's something that I didn't do in my last business, not in a formal sense. And I'm now seeing how important it is. It's the basic idea of having regular conversations with customers to build a relationship with them. Because I had a feedback form in place where you could give feedback on Focus Bear and say, this is what I liked about it, this is what I didn't like about it. But I found that without actually having a conversation with people first, the type of feedback that I'd get would be non-actionable. It would either be, I love it, or this is annoying, I hate it. And it's I can look at behavioral data and try and figure out what happened just before someone said, I hate it and quit the app. And I can get a bit of a sense, but it's much better if I can actually have a conversation with them where they trust me enough that they want to tell me, hey, Jeremy, that pop up about the break reminders where it's asking me to look away from the screen for 20 seconds, that irritated me because I was in the middle of a meeting at that point. And that type of feedback is super actionable. And we've just been incorporating those little things over time. And as I've built up more relationships, I'm getting more feedback that is helping the app to be better and better.
Sorry, I had a couple of thoughts going into my head at the same time. What would you say has really allowed you to have these customer conversations? Because people tend to be busy and tend not to necessarily agree to give out some of their time to have conversations, even though it may be around a product that they may use that they are using. How have you found success in getting a bit of their time and having these conversations?
Yeah, that is a real challenge of actually getting people to be willing to get on a call. And I guess I've got three tactics. One is troubleshooting sessions that with Smooth Messenger, even though I didn't do formal customer interviews, I got to speak with customers quite a lot because there'd be a problem with the app and I would get on a call with them. And even though it feels painful to do that, high touch customer support actually meant that while I was fixing the problem, I'm writing some code in their environment during the screen share, and I'm also asking them, oh, and out of interest, how do you measure ROI for this app? And sneaking in questions like that can be really helpful, and people are often happy to talk in that situation. And after having had one call, then it seems to be easier for them to proactively give feedback via email. The second thing with Focus Bear is I've I've made some friends with people that I've met via online communities. There's a lot of subreddits where I've met people and now we have regular calls and talk broadly about ADHD and how it's affecting our lives. And they're trying the app and giving me feedback along the way. So having that core group of people who really try the app deeply, use it, and give feedback has been really helpful. And also certain subsets of customers. For example, I've got a university as a customer. I'm trying to go B2B with Focus Bear as well. They've given a lot more feedback because it's actually their job to try out these apps for students who have disabilities. So finding the right type of customers is really important. And then the third hack I'd say is what you're doing with the podcast. I've got a podcast as well, and it's actually a sneaky customer interview that I ask people, and you ask me as well, what is your biggest challenge? What are the problems that you're facing? And that I've done more than 65 interviews now, and that's really given me a sense of what problems people face. And it then allows me to go deeper in some cases. I have also done things where I've paid people for customer interviews. I'm doing that at the moment because the startup program that I'm doing asked me to do 10 interviews within 4 days. And there's just no way that I can find enough people without paying them in that time. But I just went on to Upwork and did a job post saying, looking for students and freelancers with ADHD to have a 45-minute conversation with me, and offered them $10 for that. And that actually, I've got more than 40 people who registered interest. There's also, say, Respondly and some other websites like that where you can recruit people to do interviews with you. And that's certainly an option. It just tends to be a lot more expensive. It's more like maybe $150 per participant, even though they're only getting $10 out of it.
Brilliant. With growing and scaling Focus Bear, what would you say is really driving growth at this point in time?
SEO is the biggest source of new customers. So we
Mhm.
have more than 200 articles about various aspects of neurodiversity, and people search for those type of terms and we show up, and then they'll end up downloading the app. With Smooth Messenger, what worked the best was something similar as well. I had a very active YouTube channel where I had uploaded more than, I think, 300 videos about general videos in terms of how to use Zoho CRM. And I had become someone that was trusted in the space. I was about to say thought leader, but I don't really like that term. But generally, that type of content marketing is the way that I prefer to do it. There
Mhm.
are other channels that people will like to do. I think marketing in many ways depends on your personality and what techniques work best for you. I don't really like going to networking events or going and doing cold calls, but I'm sure it works for some people.
And it's obviously this whole idea of being productive, especially when you're working on computers and the internet, etc. It's quite a competitive space, from what I gather. I'm curious. So, when you first launched, was your, I guess, unique point of differentiation catering to neurodivergent people? Was
Yeah, that's
and
right. Yeah, so it seems like a weird market to go after, but it's actually a sizable market in that 5% of the population have ADHD, and that's going up quite rapidly. The rate of ADHD diagnosis has doubled in the last 2 years, for example. That's mainly because women are now getting diagnosed, whereas in the past it was very much considered a condition for young boys, where clinicians would only look at the hyperactive signs, and now they're starting to see what inattentive ADHD looks like in women.
certainly. So, with this idea and looking forward, how do you see Focus Bear evolving to continue to meet the needs of its users?
The next chapter is probably going quite deep on a sub niche of the ADHD market, because ADHD is definitely a niche, but it's too big. So we're looking at the type of customers who have been the most likely ones to sign up and to pay for it, and it's actually been university students. So that's where
Hmm.
I'm focusing now, looking at what uni students need and also what universities need, because there's the existing customer that we have where they've got funding to provide software to students who are having problems at university due to disabilities. And there are a lot of other universities out there that also have that type of funding available. So I'm going to be talking to more of them and understanding what their needs are and how we can best be helpful in that regard.
And within Focus Bear itself, I take it that you work remotely by and large. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the team working with me on Focus Bear is spread out around the world. I've got a few contractors in the Philippines. I've got a few developers in India, also Ethiopia. I had someone in Cambodia at one point. So we're a dispersed team, and we follow some of the general practices around remote team development, where we meet daily for a stand up, and we also make sure that we document everything asynchronously, so that even if we can't meet in the same time zone, that we're still able to collaborate.
Brilliant. And I'm curious, how do you develop a remote culture that allows for growth and allowing you to hit that triple bottom line as you talked about earlier on?
For me, it starts with who I hire and how I explain the mission to them. Because Focus Bear is quite a mission driven organization, I've hired people, as I mentioned earlier, who can empathize with our end user. And that has meant that the culture is very much around how can we make a difference to the lives of the people that we're trying to help. And that cuts through that. I've got people in the team who are very passionate about what we're doing, and they're constantly coming up with ideas. And that, I think, is the core of the culture. And then beyond that, it's
Mhm.
the little interactions throughout the day, in terms of we've got an app in Slack called Shoutouts, where we can call out when people do things well. Little things like that, I think, help to boost culture.
Mhm. With this idea of productivity and neurodivergence, are there perhaps a couple of aspects that you find doesn't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
In terms of neurodiversity, I think one thing that doesn't get talked enough about is what is actually included in the neurodiversity umbrella. Because ADHD and autism are commonly understood, but there are also probably another 40 neurotypes which are considered neurodivergent. We're talking about bipolar, talking about dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. There's also some other conditions that just alter the way that people see the world. And I think the other thing related to that is that we're often aware of the challenges. If we talk about dyslexia, for example, people think of it as this person is just unable to spell and they look sloppy and disorganized in the workplace as a result. But there's actually often strengths that go with each of these neurotypes. I believe that NASA recently launched a recruiting program where they were trying to hire dyslexic scientists because they found that people with dyslexia often have a much more active visual processing system.
Mhm.
And they're amazing at being able to design rocket components, for example. So we can think about it from that perspective that there are the challenges, of course, but if we can set up our workplace in a way where the challenges almost become irrelevant, because, for example, what I mentioned earlier with me around the background noise, that is certainly a major impediment if no adjustments are made to the workplace. But if we follow activity based working, where we've got different zones in the office, it's not an issue at all. And I can
Mhm.
be just as productive, if not more productive than other people. So that's what I'd like to see more of, some awareness of the strengths,
Mhm.
including of some of the conditions that normally people just see as not helpful at all.
Certainly. And productivity, do you find there's perhaps an aspect or two that doesn't get talked about very much?
One aspect of productivity that I'm really liking coming up more is the idea of soft productivity. Hard productivity is where it's all about self discipline and you just got to knuckle down and get things done. And soft productivity is where we factor in energy levels and we factor in how emotions and health actually impacts our ability to get things done. So that very much ties into what I was talking about earlier in terms of doing my meditation before I open my emails, because there are ways of structuring the day that actually boost your energy levels rather than it being purely a time management discussion that I've got half an hour and therefore I can achieve this task. It's more like I've got 30 high focus minutes. And in order to get to those high focus minutes, it might actually take me 2 hours if I'm sleep deprived and stressed. But if I am cheerful because I've gone for my run and I'm feeling pretty content after meditating, then maybe I get it done in 20 minutes. So I think cultivating that state of high productivity is really important. And also thinking about, from an ADHD perspective, how can we make tasks that might appear dull and rote a little bit more interesting? Because sometimes things like doing the tax return are not actually that hard if we really think about the tasks, but they can be put off for so long. I'm now okay at it, but what what is really necessary is to come up with ways to make it fun. So, for example, in my day job, I'm a product manager and I have to write business cases for new features. And I'm just pulling out something that I did because I was getting really sick of the business case format that I had to follow. And so what I did recently, instead of writing a one pager, I actually drew a one pager where I had the requirements for the feature with little drawings of people and fun quotes. And normally I've put off writing those documents, but I really enjoyed doing that and it was hard to pull myself away from it.
Brilliant. And if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
I think the soft productivity would be my top takeaway, making sure that
Mm.
if you're a leader, and we spoke about all of the things at their very beginning in terms of leaders create productivity by aligning teams and executing on business strategy, consider how your emotional and physical state contributes to your ability to do those things. That if we want to inspire loyalty in our team, then we probably have to get into a good headspace before we walk into the office. And maybe doing 5 minutes of meditation before going in could be part of that.
Jeremy, if listeners are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Jeremy Nagel, or jump onto focusbear.io.
Okay, we'll include links to that in the show notes. Jeremy, thank you for doing this. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me.